Can everybody hear me if I speak this way? Great, great. Well, all of a sudden it went quiet like church. I don't know. This is going to be a very interesting topic. We're looking forward to a stimulating conversation. My name is Peter Nichols. I'm a member of the New London Housing Commission, and the rest of the commissioners are here and listening and asking questions and looking forward to talking with you as we go through a number of panels that will be enlightening on different facets and perspectives of the issue of workforce housing. I thought I'd just quickly give you a review of what the Housing Commission really is here to do. We were created by statute, which has all kinds of regulations and guidances which are very valuable. But the purpose I'm just going to read to you because it's very important that we could start out our panels knowing what we're going to be doing going forward. Our purpose is to provide proper recognition, promotion, enhancement, encouragement, and development of a balanced and diverse supply of housing to meet the economic, social, and physical needs of the municipality and its residents as viewed in the context of the region within which the municipality is situated. That's a lot to chew, but it's really economic, social, and physical needs of the municipality, its balanced and diverse supply of housing. So that's an important mission, and we take it very seriously. I'd like to first thank the sponsors, Colby-Sawyer College. Sue, thank you to you and your team that were here. YCN is shooting this video so that we'll be on the TV and available for future reference. And also want to thank the panelists, each of you, taking time out of your day to help enlighten us on this topic. The way the program's going to go tonight, I'll introduce the moderator. We'll have the panelists give a brief self-introduction. If you haven't seen the fact sheets that are in the back that each one of them has drafted for you to understand a bit, then please grab one of those and refer to it. Our moderator will pose a number of topics for each panelist's perspective and further discussion. And there'll be follow-up questions by the Housing Commission, and then there'll be an open question and answer period. Our goal is to do this in 60 minutes, respecting the time, precious time and busy time of our panelists. And we will also hopefully have time for brief closing statements by the panelists. So with that, let me introduce to you Mark Fougere, who is our moderator this evening. Mark is also an advisor and consultant to the New London Housing Commission on workforce housing. His experience is broad and wide. He is a certified planner, has had over 30 years of experience in advising and consulting with not just private developers, which is really important to see that side of the world, and also municipalities. So he knows both sides, has had great balance and great knowledge to share with us. I would also add that he's an advisor and consultant to New Hampshire Housing and Finance Authority, which is the agency above us that helps to feed us and support us as we go forward in this effort and provide financing for projects as they're approved. So with that, let me turn it over to Mark and our panelists. Thank you very much. Mark?
Good evening, and thank you again for coming tonight, and thank you, panelists. Maybe if you could just give a brief introduction to each one of yourselves, just you know, what type of business background you have, and
sure,
just to start it out.
Great. Good evening. My name is Jim Culhane, and I am the CEO of Lake Sunapee Visiting Nurse Association here in New London.
I'm Laurie Shive. I'm with my husband, Mike Morgan, the co-owners of Blue Loon Bakery here in New London.
Good evening. I'm Sue Stubner. I'm the president of Colby-Sawyer College.
Hello. Can you hear me? Sorry. Okay, good. Tom Mannion. I'm the president and CEO of New London Hospital.
Rich Stockwell. I own the Millstone Restaurant as well as the Little Brother Burger Company right here in town.
Great. Well, housing has obviously been in the news in our country, in our region, in our state for a number of years now. The market has really exploded during COVID, which is really an odd occurrence and doesn't seem to make sense, but it's really come home in a lot of places, and it's been in the news a lot. And you hear stories and you may talk to somebody, but the commission really wanted to get into the weeds on these things, and the best way to do it is to actually reach out and talk to, you know, how has this impacted people? And we're in the process of reaching out to a number of different groups, And one of the key groups we want to talk to, obviously, is key employers in the area, and how that's impacted you. Just for some statistics, based on HUD standards, the median income for this area is pretty high. It's $105,000. Under state law, they define affordable for owner-occupied units as not costing more than $359,000. Now, the median home price in the community is $575,000. Obviously, that's a pretty significant delta. On the rental side, they consider an affordable rental unit costing no more than $1,430, but that includes utilities. Utilities cost approximately, well, the allocation is approximately $284. So that's a base rent of $1,150. And you're not going to find many 2 or 3 bedroom units in the community for families at $1,150 a month. So it just gives you some idea of the context and some of the issues we're facing here in New London. And it's actually an issue all across the state. As Peter said, I work with New Hampshire Housing. It's a huge problem on the southern tier, up in the White Mountains, obviously. So it's not just in New London, it's statewide. So we have a series of questions that we want to try to get some feedback from you people to see how this has impacted you. And I'll start with the first question, and then maybe we'll just start in this end of the room and go back, and we can just go back and forth with the different questions. First question: in what ways does the lack of affordable housing for new or prospective employees affect your ability to attract and retain workers? Please offer examples and antidotes.
So I can talk a lot, but I'm going to do my best to be succinct. And this is a very broad question to a very complex situation.
Yes.
But the Visiting Nurse Association, we service 32 towns. Obviously, one of our more important towns is New London. We provide a lot of services in New London. We provide services exclusively to people in their homes. The individuals that work in the homes range from individuals who are homemakers or home health aides or licensed nursing assistants, nurses, therapists, and so on and so forth. A disproportionate amount of the services that are provided in the area are provided by people who are the lower end of the income chain. So we end up having to recruit staff to work in New London that live further and further away because it's more and more expensive for them to live closer to New London. So the staff that work in New London are typically living 30, 40, 50 minutes away. And that becomes a much more complex and difficult recruitment, and frankly, an expense upon which we have to accommodate, and not taking into consideration other expenses such as the price of gas these days. Our recruitment efforts become more complex and frankly more expensive the further we get away from the communities that we're serving. And the reality, the affordability of housing in the immediate area, and I'm not referring to simply New London, we're talking about some of the other communities as well, means that we're recruiting at a distance where people are driving 45 minutes or an hour. And that's just becoming a very difficult, especially in a state that has a very low unemployment, that has very high competition for lower wage workers. It's becoming a very difficult business line for us to provide certain services, to the point where we don't see all of the people we would like to see. We are not able to meet some of the need in some of the communities that we serve because we aren't able to recruit the workers. And a component of that is our inability to hire workers that live within a reasonable distance that are willing to drive. And that's a variable. That's a substantial variable that we have to take into consideration and frequently have to accommodate from a cost standpoint when we hire somebody.
That was fairly succinct.
And no, I'm sorry.
So, Mark, we have a little bit of a different situation, but in some ways it's very similar to what Jim is experiencing at the VNA. When Mike and I started the bakery, for those of you who don't know, we started 4 years ago, thought it was going to be very small. I had dreams of running a small bakery cafe with a couple of people. Right now, I know it's funny. Right now we've got about 25 full and part-time folks who work for us. Majority of those are part-time. We have 6 full-time people. The majority of those part-time employees are either high school or college students, and the majority of those are also summer-only students. Our challenge, we don't ask our employees to drive around during the workday. We do ask them to drive to the bakery and start as early as 4 o'clock in the morning. So trying to recruit experienced bakers who are willing to work early morning shifts, who are motivated to come in and stand on their feet long hours, also who are able to afford to live in a reasonable distance from the bakery. Ideally, everyone that we have hired full-time would love to live in New London. I actually surveyed them before I came to this session and asked some of them some input. And all of them said, would love to live in New London. It's a great place. All of them said, looked here, couldn't find a thing to rent or to own. And the reality is that the employees cannot find anything to rent. They can't find anything, let alone to own. So the challenge has been to recruit people primarily for key positions that we have in the bakery. We end up having to look for people who have the skills, but also usually have a spouse who has another job. So they have 2 incomes and usually already lives in the area. So that pool of potential employees shrinks further and further as we go along. So it really is a challenge from the beginning to the point where we are getting more applications this year, but those who apply that are anywhere more than 30 miles away, it usually is no more than that initial conversation of, would you be interested in moving here? And they usually will take a look at what's available in New London and say, thanks, yeah, I'm going to look for something that's more affordable. So, huge challenge for us.
Good evening, everyone. I have mostly similar themes to echo from what Jim and Lori have already shared. We've had real diversity of types of openings this year, everything from housekeepers to coaches, director-level positions to vice presidents and faculty. We had 7 faculty searches this year, and those folks usually come from away, just given the experience that we need them to have in order to teach the types of courses and the expertise that's needed. Some of the other positions can come from more local region. In many cases, individuals get very excited about the positions, but then when they start to explore housing options, they'll either come to the interview and withdraw, or withdraw before even the interview. We had one of our top faculty members, candidates, accept a position, then started looking for housing after she accepted the position, and 2 weeks later withdrew from the process. And so we'd already said no to our other top candidates, so then you're in the position of having to call them back and say, just kidding, we now have an opening, but then that next person has to try to find housing. For entry-level positions, similar to what's already been expressed, given the housing constraints, driving more than 10 or 15 minutes is a real barrier for those folks, given the wages that we offer at the starting point. And we have raised some of our starting wages to try to be more competitive and just to help with the inflation, but there are limits to how much we can address those starting wages and then start to face compression at other positions. So in this market, just as others have expressed, we see a lot of our folks living 30 to 50 minutes away, which is just not ideal when we're talking about what we're trying to do here on campus with relationship building with students, and really creating a sense of community where people are around for not only teaching the courses, but for athletic events and for plays and for interacting with our students in the dining hall. Those are the kinds of issues that we're seeing.
And that type of drive time, that's when weather's good.
Right.
We have bad weather here.
Exactly.
So it makes even worse in the winter. There's a snowstorm or getting home at night. So it could be well over an hour.
Exactly.
In a very rural part of the state, which just doesn't, this is interesting.
Yeah.
So you're going to hear a theme here. It's a very similar story at our hospital, and actually on that last point, the drive times. We often, when we know snowstorms are coming, we now set up a pretty significant sleep room setup for many of our staff who need to be there, because as a hospital, we don't shut down. We have to keep running. And so we have many people. We have people who live in Vermont. We have people who live closer to Keene, closer to Concord, and everywhere in between. And they drive. And gas prices right now are really making that hard. And back to the story of, it's a really great time to look for a job, right? I mean, people are competing. They're looking for jobs. They're driving closer to home, or maybe not driving at all. They can walk to work in some cases, and people are opting out to go to different employers. We raised our minimum wage to a pretty significant $17 an hour, and I think in some cases that's more than many urban settings that we're trying to compete to get folks like that. But that's still not, when you talk about livable wage, that's still a little north of $35,000. And when we have people who are our medical assistants, our LPNs, who are helping our offices see patients and get patients through our clinics, if we don't have them, things just slow down or stop. And actually what we're seeing right now, we have about 5 vacancies that we've had for close to a year, give or take, where our primary care practices, our doctors are having to room their own patients, take their own blood pressures, things of that magnitude, because we don't have staff to do that. We've offered bonuses. We've tried everything. We're training our own. We have all these programs set up, and it's very frustrating. And these are some of the lower, entry-level frontline staff positions we're talking about. But this also affects the physicians. We actually, from a retention standpoint, we have a primary care physician who's been driving about 50 minutes to and from work every day, who has kids who he doesn't really get to see as much as he'd like to. And he's made the decision that he is going to stop driving like that and work closer to home. He looked up here for a house for his kids to relocate up here. And a primary care physician who does quite well comparatively, in his case, it was a matter of inventory, right? Getting something for a family, a larger sized family that wasn't, $600,000-$700,000. And he just is not in a position in his life where he wants to do that closer to, the South where he is right now. It's so much more affordable and makes more sense. So he's leaving, and we don't fault him for that, but it is a big problem. And I think many of you here have probably experienced wait times trying to get into your primary care provider. These are some of the things that we're dealing with. And I would also say we interestingly enough, we've had a really terrible time with nurses throughout this entire pandemic, trying to recruit and retain nurses so that we can treat our patients in the hospital setting. So even when we can find what we call a traveling nurse that we pay an extra premium to come here to see patients, we can't find places to put them up. There's no place for them to even stay. It's so difficult. Or if they do stay, they are staying in Lebanon or Concord, and they're driving, and the hospital is paying that expense too. So there are things of that magnitude that make this very difficult for a very low margin operation like ours. Hospitals do not have, if we have a small margin any given year, that's a good year. And in this environment, it's been a very, very difficult thing. We're trying our best. We are getting creative in some ways, but the housing scenario, the housing situation is definitely one of the biggest barriers that we face.
The housing availability, you meant, the inventory just isn't there, and that's, again, a problem statewide. And, typically a healthy market, housing, a house should be on the market 30, 60, 90 days, and that's normal. Now houses are on a week or a couple days, and someone like that doctor, if they're not on top of it, they'll lose a house because it's only on the market for a day or two.
Right. We're hearing things are going on the market. So our chief nursing officer is in this middle. She's trying to find a house. She's been here for about a year. She's renting, and she got lucky. She found a rental. But a house goes on Wednesday. You sign up for the Saturday, Sunday, open house. But by the time you get to the Saturday, Sunday, 3 or 4 offers have already been made. People haven't even seen the home, and it's cash. there's people making cash offers, and they're just you're already behind by the time you get to the open house. It's just a crazy market right now.
And one of the really things that's impacting that also is there's a lot of out-of-state buyers that are coming in to buy homes. Some 30%, I've heard, competing with people that live here and work here, and they're just trying to get out of their urban environment, paying cash, and it's really dislocating, us who live here and work here and want to have families and have employees that don't live 45 minutes away. So that's sort of a COVID phenomenon that's impacted the state, again, tremendously.
Well, I first want to say I'm pretty lucky in the businesses that I have. I benefit from a year-round core staff that really has been there for a long time. Anybody who's come to the Millstone, you see the same people all the time. We lost a few during the pandemic who didn't return, just didn't want to come back. But for me, the summertime is a surge, and we're very seasonal. And in my time here, you can get by with the core staff through right around now, and you get to Memorial Day, and you're sometimes benefited by college kids and high school kids that are getting out of school and doing stuff like that. This is the first year we're not really seeing those people coming around. You've always had a tough time filling kitchen positions. I benefit from some very quality guys, and you always have 3 or 4 guys who know what they're doing. And you can always bring in a high school kid who shows some aptitude, some interest, and build on that. I have a guy, Kyle Hernan, I don't know if you know him, he's a high school kid, or a college kid, who could run my kitchen because he started dishwashing and he moved right up. And I've had a series of those guys, and what we're having right now is I'm not getting high school kids who want to do the jobs in the kitchen. Servers, bartenders, they have never made so much money in their lives than they're making right now. I don't have that problem. My problem, and anybody who comes to the Millstone, you don't see me out front, you know where I am. I'm on the line. I come out, say hello, and I'm cooking 4 to 6 days a week, just because the surge is starting and there's nobody coming in, and you're paying more and more and more. He talked about a minimum wage of $17 an hour. That's what I'm paying my dishwashers, and you have to pay that. I have. My chef is making a lot of money. My sous chef is making a lot of money. And then you have other people right below them, $20, $22, $25 an hour. These are line cooks. These are guys who can just cook a burger to temperature. So I think one of the problems we face around here is we could benefit from, we had college kids sometimes who work through the winter because they want some extra money, and they can't find a place to live through the summer to stay. They would, and they like the area. There's just no place to stay. Now, years ago, and I'm not putting any pressure on the college, but they used to offer rooms for students who wanted to stay in the area. And they would pay X amount of dollars and stay in, it was in the basement of, I think, Burpee. I remember going in there and picking up somebody and taking them to work because they didn't have a car. But in my business, the surge in business and then matching it with a surge in my employees and then getting them to learn. And I always tell my staff, look, we're going to be really terrible when it gets busy. But by mid-July, end of July, you figured things out, and you have about a month where everything is good. And then they all leave. And the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks of August and beginning of September are terrible because half your staff is gone and you still stay at the same level. And that's always been the game in the restaurant business around here. I wish I had an idea of what would do that, but I don't think this is going to change. The seasonality in my business is not going to change. The question is, how do I get that sous chef, that guy who has an aptitude, has some knife skills, has a little creativity, who can do stuff? Those are the people that are missing. You have 1, 2, 3 guys, and now I have a bunch of guys who it's a hard time to get them to learn how to peel a potato. And that's what you have, and you're walking around, don't put the knife down. I don't want to get too far ahead in the questions, but you're seeing some way that this part-time surge for me, where they would have a place to stay that's not $1,500 a month, which is, you're exactly right. So my daughter lives on County Road. She says $1,500 a month, but the utilities are included. Enormous 2-bedroom place. It used to be the Doug Gay Apartments down there. for me, finding a place or somehow getting the high schools and the colleges and the college kids in the area to want to go into the food business, which everybody wants to wait tables, but they don't want to do the stuff in the back. And I'm not sure that's a housing issue. That's more of a societal issue. So, yeah, I guess that's it. It's a surge for me, and I want.
Yeah.
That's the biggest problem we have that I face.
All right, well, let's try another question. What type of housing would be most desirable to prospective new hires? Obviously, this is a big opinion, but...
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So just from a demographic standpoint, we see a lot of relatively young staff that we hire, nurses, LNAs, PTs, OTs, and obviously when they're young, when they're entry-level health care, they're obviously, a particular financial category that's very different than they might be 10, 15, 20 years later. And I think maybe when we think of, what options are available, I think we have to think about it almost from a continuum standpoint, and it's not necessarily a linear process, but when you're a 24-year-old nurse, you can afford an apartment, a little bit more experience, a little bit higher pay, you can afford something a little bit larger. If you want them to stay in the community, hopefully shortly thereafter, they've arrived to a point where they can afford maybe a small house or a condominium and so on and so forth. And we certainly don't have that option in New London. We don't hire people that make anything resembling what would arrive at the median house price mark, which I think you said was $500,000.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not...
I mean, there are condos in the community, but there's not a lot of them.
Sure, absolutely.
That's part of the problem.
So if again, just from a community standpoint, if we're thinking of if we want young people to come in and stay and raise families, that continuum needs to be available, because no one is coming in, or very, very few people are coming in, that are going to be able to enter into that market at anything resembling $500,000. It's just not feasible. Certainly nothing that's coming out of their salary that we're paying them, and we pay fairly competitively, not that competitive. So I think, again, we're really talking about entry-level housing options, which are small apartments. You're talking about larger options for people who are a little bit further along in their career or a little bit greater financial stability. You're talking about either larger apartments or condos or so on and so forth. And without that continuum, it's difficult to envision how we really appeal to and have young people want to come and raise families here. I don't know how they do it, and I'm not sure they do, frankly. And certainly New London is a very desirable location, but not at 22, not at 24 or 26. I think that's just, it's just not a feasible financial option for them. So, from our standpoint, when we look at the staff that we work with and the needs of the staff, you're really talking everything from an apartment up to affordable houses. If you want to retain the people to grow roots and remain in a community and stay there, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, obviously apartments provide the broadest type of housing for people. I think trying to bring in single-family home, detached, affordable housing is a lot more challenging, and the quantity isn't going to be there. Condominiums, I think, is sort of the middle ground where the quantity can be there at a price point that is more in line with the middle type worker, and it's more affordable to build.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a range of options. There's a continuum of options for employees, I think, for all of us, depending on whether they're a 22-year-old college graduate or a 19-year-old prep cook who wants to grow roots in the area. The problem is, as I think some of us have said, it's not just an affordable housing crisis. You have not just people who are working in entry-level jobs looking for a place to live that's not an hour away. You have everybody looking for housing. So I have had several employees who were looking to buy a house, help them find a mortgage broker who could help them figure out the intricacies of an FHA loan, figure out what they could afford. And even getting through that process, trying to find a house that they could buy that wasn't getting scooped up by someone coming in with an all-cash offer, A lot of it's not out there. I've had employees looking for land because they've decided, well, they're going to get a manufactured house, or even in the case of one employee, they're building their own tiny house. But then the challenge they run up against is not only is the land priced really high, there's some land out there, but it's also difficult to get over some of the zoning requirements of a piece of land that is so large. They don't need a large piece of land, but zoning requires them to buy a large piece of land. They don't have the money then to go ahead and put in the utilities that they need to put a house there. And then the renters, if you ask them this question, they're just saying, I need a place to live. I'll live with a roommate if I could find a roommate. I'll rent a room somewhere if somebody would rent a room. There's lots of rooms, but they're all Airbnb'd, so that doesn't work for me very well. They're just looking for some place that they can afford. I will caveat that with, in terms of attracting younger people, entry-level people, they're looking for a place they can afford. They're also looking for some sort of socializing, nightlife, something. They come and they look at New London, and I love New London. But if I were 22 years old and I were moving to New London, it's a college town, huh? Okay, all right, what else is there to do? And that actually is part of, I would think, the housing, in my mind, the housing continuum is also the community continuum. Of we want to have affordable housing, but we also want to have a place where they can see themselves as a single person, see themselves as a young married couple, a place to bring their kids, and a place to build a foundation.
Yeah.
That's well said. Yeah, I really don't have that much to add. I think it's really been said already. Just that continuum is really critical. The price point that our director of HR says that most folks ask her about is between $1,200 and $1,500 is what they could possibly stretch to afford in terms of apartments.
That's the number. Yeah.
And as you mentioned earlier, they don't exist here in New London. We too have, our director of residence life has been looking for a house for his family for over a year. I think it's almost close to 2 years at this point. And we're fortunate that we have 4 apartments that were made for staff in our residence halls, and so he's in one of those, but it's not ideal given he's got family, and it's pretty small for his family. So I think the continuum and the diversity of choice is really critical.
I agree, Sue. A lot of it's already been said. I'll make it about me for a second. So we landed here March of 2020. Not a great time to start a job, by the way.
At a hospital.
Yeah, at a hospital.
Welcome to COVID.
But so we were looking for a while. We ended up building, which I'd also not recommend doing during a pandemic. But it's the finding a lot of land and then getting, even if you can get a lot of land, even if you can get a builder, foundations getting poured are years out at this point. I mean, they're so busy, and they too are dealing with their own workforce shortages. I mean, they finding their own
supply issues, just getting 2x4s.
It's crazy. It's
doors and
there's a lot going there. And I guess I'll go back to one other thing. We did do a workforce study of our own workforce, and just to add some level of urgency here, some great news. Over half of the nurses at New London Hospital have been here for more than 20 years. They're super committed, long-term, really love their jobs being here. The problem is when you look at the overarching demographics, we have no Gen, the latest generation. We have a few millennials, and then really you start seeing Gen X and up in terms of what our workforce looks like. So we are, if you look at our aging workforce from a nursing specific population, it's quite grim if we go out a good 10, 15 years. If we don't solve this problem, we're going to have a whole heck of a lot of other problems that we have to grapple with. And it really is a big workforce issue, because these folks are people who have been here, they've been part of the community, they're able to buy homes, perhaps in a different era when it was more affordable. I don't know if it was more affordable at any point in the past. I'm going to assume it probably was. But today, it's just everyone comes in to the points that are already made. They look, they get frustrated, they leave. And some sort of continuum, a mix is absolutely, I think, the right answer to figuring out this problem.
I mean, the housing prices, you know, after the Great Recession, it took a while, you know, 3 or 4 years before the momentum returned. But I'd say the last 3 or 4 years is when it's really just ramped up. I mean, the rates, I mean, we've had almost free money for a decade now. That's changing. It's going to change fast. And the brakes are going to be tapped here real soon. You can always see it. I read an article today about second home, demand for second homes going down. So the interest rate's definitely going to play a role in opening things up. But I think the pent-up demand is going to be there for a while. I was talking to a realtor in Henniker the other day where 30 people showed up for one house and 29 people went home unhappy, you know.
But you also look at, Mark, you think if the interest rates actually depressing the number of buyers on the market, but think about that from an entry-level employee, and you talk about $1,500 being what they can afford. What does that do to it if they're trying to buy a house, the mortgage that they're going to
Well, yeah,
pay?
I mean, every point's like $400 or $500. Yeah.
I think Lori hit it right on the head. You look at New London as a place that young people don't want to be. There's nothing going on. And I've been around long enough to remember when I was in my 20s, there was a 14-team softball league that played in this town. So you're talking 8 to 12 guys per team. And we actually played right out back here where these new dorms are in college. And there was a huge amount of that workforce. So you're talking 20 to 35, even older than that. There were contractors, there were all these bankers, all these guys used to show up and play softball. And there was always at that time a house that you could find. You could find a house and live with 3 or 4 other buddies, stuff like that. That stuff is disappeared. Those houses are being snatched up, renovated, and turned into a $500,000 something. So I think some type of entry-level housing might be the answer in drawing people to the area. That younger workforce, the professionals that might want to stay in the area. And then I always loved this area because of the lakes and the mountains. And when I used to hire chefs and everything like that, I said, look, if you don't like lakes and you don't like mountains, you don't like hiking and swimming, it's probably not a great area for you because you're not going out dancing at midnight. You just can't do that around here. And who wants to? I mean, I'm old now, so. But I think entry-level housing to try to draw more of that age group would make a huge difference in this area because those houses don't exist. Not anymore.
Thank you. That's good stuff. Next question. What do you feel would help the most in achieving better housing solutions for your existing or prospective employees?
I do think nightlife. I think we're going to start building some discos in town. I think that.
What's a disco?
Right. Do they say disco anymore? Oh, sorry about that. We appreciate discos. So from my standpoint, again, we've stated before, this is not unique to New London by any stretch of the imagination, nor do I think is the town of New London in and of itself going to solve this problem. This is a regional problem. This is a statewide problem. And, in larger areas, we call it urban planning in terms of how we situate life, communities, stores, schools, and so on and so forth. And it's at least for me, it's easy to envision, a more regional approach where multiple towns work together to establish more of, I'll call it rural planning until we build those discos. And we do commit to the development and the investment and the funding of additional housing without decompressing, the very tight market that we have right now. And there's a variety of reasons and factors as to why we have a tight market. But without additional capacity in a better location for us, I think all the previous points, have been said. It is going to get much more difficult and frankly expensive for us to do what we need to do. And that has very significant downstream effects. So how do we as a region begin to realize that certain services, certain industries need to survive, hospitals, healthcare industries, businesses, and how do we begin to build and add capacity to allow for some of these for some of these options to take place. I think that we could have lengthy conversation on that topic and that question alone for the remainder of the day. But I do think, the commitment to the investment in a regional approach to address some of the capacity issues, I think, has to be taken into consideration.
In New England, we don't like change, right? We don't like that field that used to be there, have houses on it, and we're very resistant to change. And if you're going to address a problem like this, everybody, not just New England, but everybody's going to have to accept change, because that field or woods or whatever at some point needs to change in order to help not only businesses that everybody needs. Everyone needs to go to the hospital at some point. Thank God there's one here in town. If you're not, you're shagging an hour away. So it's a mentality of accepting change is a key point. Lauren?
And I'm going to forgive you for not saying everyone needs to go to the bakery, so we need to keep a bakery in town.
Every day.
Every day. Joking aside, though, restaurants are a part of the network of the community and are important. It's important to have restaurants and retail shops, as well as a hospital, as well as the school, and
Absolutely.
the infrastructure has to be there. Now, you say, what can we do about this? What do we suggest? I mean, my answer is fairly simple, and well, we need money to build a lot of that infrastructure. Is the money going to come from New London? No, because we have a small town. We have 4,500 people. I saw in the last, in the master plan, it said we're going to grow, the population is going to grow at maybe about 500 every 10 years. I think it's going to be a little bit larger than that. I think it already is, but still not a huge tax base. Right. It is going to take state funding. It's going to take federal funding, really, at the end of the day. I did see that New Hampshire has gotten some federal funding to build some workforce housing up in northern New Hampshire. Could we get some of that money in this region?
It's a statewide initiative. It's
Yeah.
$100 million.
Yeah.
A good portion of that is going to be made available. It just got approved by the Executive Council in the last few weeks. But the details and the rules and all that, which are going to be on there, the strings,
Yeah.
the famous government strings, we haven't really sorted through yet. But, I mean, that's a piece. Zoning plays a role, obviously. So
zoning does. It's not an easy solution. I don't envy the job of the commission in figuring this out and making recommendations to the planning board as well as to the select board. I think that there is a lot of interest in this town and a lot of support for figuring out some solutions. So I am cautiously hopeful that we'll get there.
excellent.
Yeah, again, not a whole lot to add. I think the one piece that perhaps we could do better is just see more collaboration between the businesses in town, that if you've got someone who's found a place and has a trailing spouse, how can we work together to find that spouse or partner a job at one of our institutions? We do that with another school, and they're in Henniker, NEC. We try to look out for one another that way, but we should be doing that here in New London as well.
Good idea. Yeah.
So.
Ditto. I mean, the best points have already been made. I think there's a business case here for the need. We've demonstrated that. We can all talk about the fact that this isn't a, oh, we might need this. There's some urgency here. And I think that the thing that we need to do is just release, and this is one of the best ways to start. So here we are as a panel talking about this with our community, and we're trying to come up with a solution. I think there needs to be some collaboration. We need to really focus on this, and whatever comes forward, hopefully at the end of this, it may not be perfect for everyone involved, but I do think we need to really start moving forward, understanding that we have to come up with a solution. We have to do something. If we don't, there are some significant downsides to what you enjoy and what you have in this community that you might not anymore.
I agree 150%. I think, what else am I going to say? I look at the money that you're talking about, this $100 million. I know Hanover, Lebanon has built a low-cost housing, and those apartments are beautiful. They're right up by Dartmouth on that road going into the college, into Dartmouth College. And if you make more than 30 or 35,000, I'm not sure what the line is, you don't get in there. So they've they've taken that piece. So I know the money's there, and I don't know why they got it first, but I think you can do that, because as a private investor, who's going to pony up the money to build something like that? I can only imagine the millions to build a 4 or 5 story, however big that place is, with the finishing and everything that's there. It's, I mean, commercial, what is it, $400 a square right now, and you're building X amount of square footage of living space. It's going to be huge. So I think federal help, and I mean, maybe that's, I don't mean to skip to the last question, but maybe that's where the local businesses get involved, and it's a collaboration of that to try to build something that was going to attract more people, young families and young professionals to the area.
I mean, some of that housing has been able to get financing through New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority, which obviously helps underwrite it, and with some other grants. Other projects that have been built in the state have been privately financed, but the density was there. The density bonus was there. I was involved in 2 projects in Londonderry. There was no state funds, federal funds. 50% of the units are set aside as workforce housing, but the density was high enough to make the numbers work. I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's a math equation. There has to be enough rent to cover the mortgage. And if the density is great enough, you can have enough revenue to cover your costs. But with this money, it'll be interesting to see if that makes a dent. And obviously, if there's a possibility to grab it here, we're going to pursue that. So last question. As a New London-based employer, what do you think your role should be in addressing the workforce housing crisis in New London? We touched on some of this already, but if you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. I think, well, first and foremost, I think you're a good representation that people want to better understand the problem that we have and want to better understand and participate in the solutions. And I think that's probably a key takeaway, which is I think there's a substantial education component of what we can do to discuss the current and the future consequences of how housing impacts our industry. And I'll just talk for half a second about the healthcare industry. The reality is we all have a substantial number of open positions. If the planets were to align and we were able to actually hire the people that we needed to do everything we needed to do, we're talking about the housing, we're talking hundreds of units would need to be available. And don't get me wrong, there's a number of variables, a lot of variables and a lot of barriers to why we can't hire the staff that we need to hire. But from a housing standpoint, you're talking about hundreds of units would need to be put together for just to support the hiring just in the healthcare industry, really, in the towns that we serve. And I'm looking at Tom because he faces, this is a much greater problem for him than it is for us, but obviously we're in the same industry. So I think the education is necessary, and I do come back, I think, to what the other panelists had talked about. I think there has to be a real commitment to understanding the problem and pursuing an investment, time, energy, money, to trying to solve this problem, because I do think we do have a substantial sustainability issue, which is it will be worse in 5 years, in 10 years, in 15 years, and that will have a substantial impact on our ability to provide care in the communities we currently serve.
I mean, that's why we're having this panel, because it's one thing to read it in the paper or online that there's a housing problem, but when you see your fellow citizens and fellow employers conveying that to everybody, I think it brings it home and provides a sharper focus that it's real.
No, I agree. So a couple of just random last thoughts, and do I think we play a role? Obviously, I'm sitting here. I think we do play a role.
Very important role.
It's an important role.
You're a baker.
Exactly. But I'm a baker. This is what I thought. I'm just a baker. I spend a lot of time, though, on non-baking things. I spend time with employees sitting in our office talking about, I may have to quit because I'm losing the apartment that I'm renting is getting sold and I may have to quit. And I don't know where I'm going to live. And talking to someone saying, I need to figure out, I'm getting married, we need to find a place to live together, we can't afford some place, we bought a place, it had no inspection, it's got no septic, it might be dangerous, but we're going to buy it anyway because we need a place to live. So, and this is almost every employee. We've heard stories like this, the ones that are not teenagers. And I will say that we've got some really talented teenagers who, if they saw a way forward to stay in this area and do a job that they love, because a lot of them don't want to go off to the big city. A lot of them would love to stay here, but don't see a really positive way of moving forward in terms of having a job that will pay for a place for them to live on their own. I do think that there are probably some creative things that we can think about in terms of, especially for entry level, getting them some access to housing. One of our sons lives in Boulder, and they have a huge Facebook community for entry-level employees as well as college students to say, hey, I've got a room available in this place, or hey, I'm looking for a roommate and here's my background. And that is the accepted way that all of the businesses in town as well as the university helps to get people have rooms. If there are housing available, accessory dwelling units available that people want to open up to entry-level employees, is there a way that we can provide some sense of assurance that yes, these are good people that have a good job and steady income? Is there a way to make that more accessible to them in the immediate area? And then one last thought is, can we possibly get some of the local banks involved to those entry-level employees, or even further up, those mid-range employees who are looking for a place to live but haven't ever bought a house before because they've never needed to? Is there some way that we can provide them some community support to understand what the process is, understand how much they can afford, and team them up with some folks that can help them find some affordable housing in a reasonable distance? Just a few thoughts.
Some great thoughts. We're very supportive of more options, being available here in New London, and happy to help explore funding options. I think the point about the banks is a great one. I know that we had a nursing faculty member who, there's a new group here in town that is trying to help people find rooms to rent. And, again, she had been kind of couch surfing for 6 months and finally at least has a room now. But that's not a long-term solution. So anything that we can do to help be part of the solution, we're willing to do. We have actually converted one of our residence halls on campus for employee housing. They do have 2 rooms to themselves, but they do have to share a bath and they have to share a kitchen, so it's not for everyone, and not everyone wants to return to dorm life. But that's something that we can do to try to make it a little bit better for some of our employees.
So I think one of the big things that we need to do after this is that the conversation doesn't just stop here, right? I think that the group that's up here, along with the banks and the other businesses that aren't necessarily on this stage right now, that we continue to lock arms and talk about this as a need, and whether it's in additional town forums or it's with our elected officials. Are there ways to talk about congressional appropriations or other things that we should and could be eligible for? I know that often every year there's all right, who has something they want in your local area? Tell us what your needs are. And there are opportunities for us to advocate for things on that federal level. And the $100 million for the state is a great start. That's obviously going to get sucked up lickety-split. That's not going to be anywhere near enough for what we need. But we don't need to get it right tomorrow, but we do. This is probably a long game, right? It's probably going to take years of phasing and planning and how we do this. So we have to keep that energy up and don't let the conversation stop. I think for New London Hospital, we are a non-for-profit. Our primary goal is to meet our healthcare mission. But part of that is looking at our workforce and how we can support and grow that. So I think for us, could there be some fundraising opportunities and the like that we should throw our weight behind? I think that's absolutely something we can look at, and again encourage people to work with us to figure something out. But not knowing enough and not having an actual campaign necessarily in place, that's something we'd have to talk about at a future date.
Well, this is just the beginning. This is the first forum, and I know we're planning on other forums, so thank you.
Well, I can't, again, agree more. I'm always last to go, but that's okay. He's right. It's going to be a long-term process, and I think a collaboration, because it seems like, as I'm listening, the different industries have different needs. For me, I'm more of a surge from May to October 15th, as opposed to finding a home for a family, a husband and a wife and family, finding a home for them to live in, as more it is for me, an apartment, or college kids are coming back, or 20-somethings in the area who are going to work in the restaurants, and those places just don't exist. So, I mean, a collaboration of, and I speak with Tommy Mills and Bob Williams, and I speak with them about this problem almost daily. I spent an hour with Bob Williams earlier today, and we were talking about this summer, and it's the first year, and he's been around a lot longer than I. He's scared this summer that he's going to have to close, because you only have X amount of guys, and you're not increasing that. So he says, you're going to have to close Monday or Tuesday, which is going to cost X. That's your season from May to October. The only thing I can think of is that the economy this won't continue. I mean, it always kind of goes, it ebbs and flows. I was around in 2001 and 2008 and all the different things that happened, and who knows what's going to happen then. But I still think an initiative of some type to get some type of housing or entry-level homes in the area long-term, it will absolutely benefit the area, and is absolutely necessary for businesses to survive, as well as getting the college, the people they need, and all the services that need to be provided to an area that's growing. I mean, I see building everywhere, because there's no houses to buy. There's no inventory, so they're building everywhere. So it's absolutely right. You need money and somebody to spearhead it, and I think this is the start, and I hope it doesn't stop here. It continues to go, and there's get the ball rolling at least a little bit over the long term.
Excellent. Collaboration between businesses is something that happens quite often. I'm a planning consultant down in Henniker, and actually there, a local concrete company is very busy in the summer, is going to be working with the ski industry, who's very busy in the winter, to try to come up with a housing solution to help them during those two competing peak areas. And that's one idea that may have some options here. We have like 5 minutes.
Yeah, I think we could do one or two questions and
questions,
then wrap it up. Sure. Any questions?
Someone behind you, Peter.
Mr. Allenby in the back.
I'm Celeste Cook. I'll take this off. I'm the welfare officer in New London. Housing, of course, is a huge issue. One of the things that's not been talked about, there are middle-aged people that find themselves in a very difficult position and have nowhere to live because, they've used their money or things like that have happened. We're very fortunate. We have Bittersweet here, but that doesn't, people that make more money than can live at Bittersweet, and you can't get in there anyway for 2 or 3 years. So it's something to keep in mind when you talk about this, that we need housing for other people too, besides just, workers.
Many different forms of housing.
Yes,
Right.
different. Thank you.
Hi, I'm David Crandall. I'm a resident of New London, and I work for Twin Pines Housing in the Upper Valley, where we create and manage affordable housing. I've only been there about a year, and I have a lot to learn, but one thing I have seen is how important it is to know the pulse of a community. I know in White River Junction that there's a very active listserv, and I see every morning the pros and cons of various housing projects. And so my question to this group is, how well do you feel you know the pulse of this community? The questions that need to be answered and the concerns that need to be addressed. Mark talked about the resistance to change, and I was just wondering, how well do you feel you have a sense of that?
I'll go first. So I'm the junior probably person here. I've only been here for a couple of years, but I will say that I think there was a comment made earlier. I can't remember if it was Mark or someone else, but about how folks don't like to see houses going up on the field that they've always known, or what have you. And I think there's a really great initiative around conservation around here too. That folks really want to conserve land and keep this town not a, they don't want to make it a metropolitan area necessarily. But I think there's a middle ground, and I think it can be done right. There is a little bit, from what I've seen, not in my. We need this, just don't do it in my backyard. And so we somehow have to get around some of that, and I think there's some opportunities to do that. But again, I'm the junior person on the panel, so you have to ask my co-panelists.
That's not unique to New London, I can promise you that. It's everywhere. It's just the nature of communities.
We have one other comment.
Hi, my name's Steve Allenby, and I'm a New London resident and also the president of a group called Kearsarge Neighborhood Partners. And this past year, we tried a pilot for home sharing, which we placed 2 of Sue's employees. One was the nurse, who's now out of that home and into her own apartment. But between accessory dwelling units and home sharing, I think that could offer a pretty quick hit. And but we need help doing that. And we've researched, North Conway's got a home sharing program, Woodstock, Vermont does. Vermont's had one for 30 years, Linda, something like that. We've got all the legal documents and looked at that. So that's an example of a program that could help. And I would argue we've got quite a bit of square footage capacity because we have older houses with maybe 1 or 2 people. We have a lot of condos that are only lived in for a couple of months a year. So there may be opportunities, and Tom and I have talked about traveling nurses possibly going someplace for 3 months or something like that. So I think if we get really creative, it'd be great. But that's a kind of a piece of the puzzle that really wasn't discussed tonight that I think could offer us some short-term relief.
Thank you. Thank you, panelists. This has been wonderful. I appreciate it. I would just offer you the opportunity to say one additional comment if you'd like to close things up. We reached 60 minutes, and my promise was to close in 60. So do you have any further to say? We haven't asked you. You want to add? Please do so.
I think Rich should go first.
Yes, I'm sorry. I should have bounced it back and forth, Rich.
Well, talking about things in the first solution to a problem is to admit you have one, and I think we all can agree that we do, and all the different types of bakeries and colleges and all the different things that we have. I guess with everything we've talked about, my only additional comment is I think you're going to see this summer. I think it's going to be an extremely busy summer, and for my businesses, you always worry about somebody waiting too long for their tuna melt or waiting too long for this or all those different things. And I find New London has been incredibly supportive to the restaurants as far as that goes and understanding all of the problems that we face. I mean, I come out with my apron on almost every day and, they're like, what are you cooking for? I'm like, well, do you want your lunch? This is my business. That's the only way you're going to get it. And, I don't have anybody, I haven't had anybody who lives in town. I know most of the people in here, at least have seen them. And they're incredibly supportive, incredibly generous throughout the pandemic and even now. And, I think I didn't expect to see this many people here, honestly. So that tells you the support is there. And he talked about the pulse of the community. I think you're seeing it here. I mean,
I thought we were going to have like maybe 5 people here tonight.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's fantastic. There. I think this can really make an impact on going forward with this problem.
And I'll just say that going back to it, I think there are a lot of people who want to figure out something. I think that we are at a place today where, yes, the awareness of there is an issue. Now we need to move toward the desire to do something about it. And I think this is one of the first steps along that path. But we have to keep our foot on the pedal, and we have to keep moving forward and coming up with more plans, being creative, thinking about everything. Twin Pines, by the way, I've seen really great work that you guys have done. I think it's a phenomenal organization. Who knows, maybe that's you guys could be part of the solution.
They're on our call list.
Okay, very good. Because, in the Upper Valley in Vermont, they have done a phenomenal job with building very, very great looking housing and probably something that, and he didn't pay me any money to say this, so I just want you to know this. I have just observed this. So anyway, but I do think partners like Twin Pines, if there are others, that's going to be a part of the way that we pave the road to a future where we can not just enjoy what we have today, but enjoy even more and do so in a way that we all love living in this community without having anything taken away.
Yeah, I would just say it's a great community. It'd be great to see this momentum really grow from this point forward, and it's likely going to take a multifaceted solution. And so I thank the Housing Commission for exploring all possible options that we can pursue as we really work hard together to try to address this critical problem.
Yeah, I would echo what Sue said, and I was a little shocked that the commission asked me to come speak on this panel, but I'm very grateful that you did. I feel that this is such an issue that is core to the continued success of the town and the continued success of all of our employees and all of the services that we're providing to the town and to the region. So I am hopeful that there are multiple solutions we can pursue. There is no one solution.
Exactly.
I hope we pursue it, and I would just say that time is of the essence. We've got folks who need housing now, and it's not going to get easier the longer that we wait. And if you want to start a softball league, I've got, our guys want to do it. So yeah, you're on.
Ditto. And I think a lot has been said, and I think your commitment, your turnout tonight, I think is a question of inertia, and I think continuing that conversation is necessary. I think we've talked a fair amount about the consequences of sustainability in the direction that we may be heading, and I think there's probably an equal, if not a better, discussion to have regarding the benefits of housing and what our community and communities can look like over a 5, 10, 15, 20-year strategic plan, because I agree with what's been said. We're not fixing this problem by the day after tomorrow. So I think it's an education conversation. I think it's a commitment. I think the finger on the pulse is a very valid question and should be learned, known, and explored, and that should really drive the education that I think is necessary for the benefits that can be had with the long-term strategic plan to include affordable housing. And lastly, I would just say that if we all go out tonight in New London, we will shatter the myth that there's no nightlife in New London. So I'll see you out tonight. But thank you. Thank you.
Panelists, Mark, moderator, thank you very much for your insights. This is very helpful. We have more panels to come, and thank you for your support. Have a nice day.
Thank you very much. Excellent.